I'm a lifelong traveler. Even as a little kid, I was actually working out that it would be cheaper to go to boarding school in England than just to the best school down the road from my parents' house in California. And so, from the time I was 9 years old, I was flying alone several times a year over the North Pole just to go to school. And of course, the more I flew, the more I came to love to fly. So the very week after I graduated from high school, I got a job mopping tables so that I could spend every season of my 18th year on a different continent. And then, almost inevitably, I became a travel writer, so my job and my joy could become one. And I really began to feel that if you were lucky enough to walk around the candlelit temples of Tibet or to wander along the seafront in Havana with music pulsing all around you, you could bring those sounds and the high cobalt skies and the flash of the blue ocean back to your friends at home and really bring some magic and clarity to your own life. Except, as you all know, one of the first things you learn when you travel is that nowhere is magical unless you can bring the right eyes to it. You take an angry man to the Himalayas, he just starts complaining about the food. And I found that the best way that I could develop more attentive and more appreciative eyes was, oddly, by going nowhere, just by sitting still. And of course, sitting still is how many of us get what we most crave and need in our accelerated lives, a break. But it was also the only way that I could find to sift through the slideshow of my experience and make sense of the future and the past. And so, to my great surprise, I found that going nowhere was at least as exciting as going to Tibet or to Cuba. And by going nowhere, I mean nothing more intimidating than taking a few minutes out of every day or a few days out of every season, or even, as some people do, a few years out of a life in order to sit still long enough to find out what moves you most, to recall where your truest happiness lies, and to remember that sometimes making a living and making a life point in opposite directions. And of course, this is what wise beings through the centuries from every tradition have been telling us. It's an old idea. More than 2,000 years ago, the Stoics were reminding us it's not our experience that makes our lives, it's what we do with it. Imagine a hurricane suddenly sweeps through your town and reduces every last thing to rubble. One man is traumatized for life, but another, maybe even his brother, almost feels liberated and decides this is a great chance to start his life anew. It's exactly the same event, but radically different responses. There's nothing either good or bad, as Shakespeare told us in Hamlet, but thinking makes it so. And this has certainly been my experience as a traveler. 24 years ago, I took the most mind-bending trip across North Korea. But the trip lasted a few days. What I've done with it, sitting still, going back to it in my head, trying to understand it, finding a place for it in my thinking, that's lasted 24 years already and will probably last a lifetime. The trip, in other words, gave me some amazing sights, but it's only sitting still that allows me to turn those into lasting insights. And I sometimes think that so much of our life takes place inside our heads, in memory or imagination or interpretation or speculation, that if I really want to change my life, I might best begin by changing my mind. Again, none of this is new. That's why Shakespeare and the Stoics were telling us this centuries ago. But Shakespeare never had to face 200 emails in a day. The Stoics, as far as I know, were not on Facebook. We all know that in our on-demand lives, one of the things that's most on demand is ourselves. Wherever we are, any time of night or day, our bosses, junk mailers, our parents can get to us. Sociologists have actually found that in recent years, Americans are working fewer hours than 50 years ago, but we feel as if we're working more. We have more and more time-saving devices, but sometimes it seems less and less time. We can more and more easily make contact with people on the furthest corners of the planet, but sometimes in that process, we lose contact with ourselves.